want to focus on Vancouver because I feel like Vancouver gets a bad, or not enough.
There is a picture, I would put it this way, there is a version of CanLit, a geography of CanLit that doesn't really have Vancouver on it.
Yeah, why do you think that is?
I can tell you why that is, because it's not universal. There was a kind of an Eastern Canadian, Central Canadian, Lower Canada
Bias.
idea of what Canadian literature is, and it comes strictly out of the Anglo-European tradition, especially the Anglo tradition. So Toronto is, especially when you look at the 19th century poets and the early 20th century poets and other writers, it is dominated by people who model themselves on English writers. Montreal got away from that a little bit. It had a little bit more room for French influence. Montreal was a very divided city, but the intellectuals kind of read each other's stuff. And there was a big influence on English language writers from French language writers.
Okay, let's put them over here.
For example, just recently there was an event at people's co-op bookstore
That's okay.
where a Windsor-based poet called Louis Cabri, who grew up in Ottawa, did a piece on Claude Gauvreau, who was a significant Quebec writer, but is basically very little known out here. And so what he was trying to do was raise a little bit of awareness of a guy called Claude Gauvreau. That's an example, and people like Leonard Cohen and Mordecai Richler came out of that tradition, which was counter to the Sir Charles Goddamn Roberts kind of stuff that you had in Toronto. The Archibald Lampman, that kind of stuff. Vancouver BC was at a real distance from that, and you had some outposts of that kind of literary tradition in here, in the person of somebody like Ethel Wilson, a well-known Vancouver novelist. You'll become acquainted with her. She wrote a book called Swamp Angels, which is kind of a basic text for people growing up in literature in Vancouver, which you might interest yourself in at some point. Swamp Angel, yeah.
Write it down.
And she notoriously had a salon in the West End, which included other local literary figures. And I think Earl Burney might have been part of that, but I'm not sure about that part. And a lot of the Victoria writers, somebody like P.K. Page would be kind of in that lineage as well.
Okay.
But Vancouver was far more influenced by literary currents that were swirling on the West Coast in San Francisco and in New York. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the New York poets, the people around John O'Hara, for example. Not John, Frank O'Hara, actually.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Frank O'Hara. And they wrote a very different kind of in O'Hara particularly, a vernacular kind of verse. A guy called George Oppen also came out of New York, and his work influenced people on the West Coast and up and down the West Coast. So the literary poetic traditions that developed and took root in Vancouver were as much influenced by modernism and avant-gardes that the vector was up the coast. And in fact, a particular strong vector was an important institution was SFU, Simon Fraser University. When it was established in the mid-'60s, they recruited a whole new English department. I think they still call it that, but it's a literature department.
It's still English,
basically.
It's still called English.
And they recruited more in the United States. And one of the people they recruited, in fact, although he never taught here, it turned out to have a seismic impact in Vancouver, was the poet Jack Spicer. He was actually offered a job in Vancouver at SFU in 1965, but his personal life was such a mess, he died of his alcoholism before he could take the position.
Oh, no.
Yes, and but the way that what the outcome of that was, well, instead of Spicer, why don't we offer the position to another poet from that same San Francisco scene, a guy called Robin Blazer.
Yeah.
And so Blazer, he ended up getting the position that had been initially offered to Spicer. And Blazer, in addition to being a significant poet of significant achievement himself, was probably even more significantly a teacher and a mentor and a mage to a whole generation of poets. One of the impacts he had, the kind of the unexpected kind of side effects, was his partner at the time was a guy called Stan Persky, a young guy called Stan Persky.
Yeah.
So Stan ended up coming up to Canada as Blazer's boyfriend, essentially, his domestic partner, his living partner. And another San Francisco poet, the younger generation there, a guy called George Stanley, decided this is actually, Vancouver looks interesting.
Yeah.
And he moved up here. In fact, he taught up in Terrace for many years.
Cool.
Yeah. So San Francisco, the San Francisco avant-garde, which was also influenced by people like, Rex Roth, Kenneth Rex Roth. Who else am I thinking of there? So yes, San Francisco and poetic ideas that came up to Canada through the United States were far more influential on the West Coast than stuff that was happening in central Canada throughout my life.
Interesting.
And that, of course, created its own dynamic. And George Bowering is a guy, he actually straddles that in a certain way. He's always been a bit of a bête noire of Canadian literature for the simple reason that he embraced. And
get out of your way.
this is a dynamic that you,
Thank you.
will not have had an opportunity, I don't think, to experience firsthand. But one of the things that rubbed up against was nascent ideas about Canadian nationalism, which were much stronger in central Canada than they were either in east of that, in Quebec and the Maritimes, or west of that. And there was, as a result of that, a certain amount of suspicion bordering on resentment, and it included exclusion of the kind of work that was happening in Vancouver. So in a lot of ways, I don't think people
Western
like
alienation.
George, a version of
Well,
that.
that's
but it's
politically,
more,
yeah.
It's more an aesthetic that these people were not just allergic to people in the West. They were allergic to these writers' embrace of people like Ezra Pound and Gertrude Stein and stuff, which that was Satan to them, right?
Okay.
That modernism stuff. And, in political terms, it feels like it was kind of justified. Well, that Pound, he turned out to be a crazy fascist and blah, blah, blah. Yes, but his ideas about poetics were actually kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon for people who have complicated politics or personal habits to come up with some pretty smart ideas sometimes. However, Vancouver has been at a bit of I'm not sure what the analogy would be, but we've never really sat easily within the CanLit, kind of the House of CanLit.
Yeah, I find that so strange, because obviously there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Such a new start.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe just thank you for coming this morning to the Feral Archive.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I was actually very excited for you to come because you have a specific connection to the archive in that you have all of those books that James and I cataloged.
The ones that were saved.
The non-feral.
Yeah.
And then
the extra copies of these.
Exactly.
Sort of
Wait,
thing,
so you have a bunch of tissues as well?
I know there are some.
Yeah.
Like he's given me the spreadsheet, and I know there's another stash of them.
Yes.
That somewhere, but they're mostly duplicates and stuff like that.
Okay.
And so I don't know how much of a complete run. And I do have, there is a local poet, organizer, scholar called Rob Maurer who's interested in a lot of all
I've
that
heard
stuff.
his name.
Yeah.
Not met him, but heard his name.
You should come to one of his events at the Co-op. In fact, at the end of, when is it? Sometime in October, he's launching the next 2 issues of his Lively Some magazine.
Okay.
And they usually launch at the Co-op, and I think they're looking for an event date at the end of October. And that, to my mind, is right now the most lively and interesting poetry forum in the city.
Okay. Yeah. I will definitely attend if I can make it. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, so, because, obviously, I feel like we're getting to know each other. Pretty comfortable talking with you. And I was thinking about, there's just a lot of, I don't know, irony, I think, in, like, the collection that is in this garage. Because, I spent September 2024 cataloging and documenting with James Felton.
Yeah, just before the move,
Yeah, just before the move, or in preparation for the move, essentially.
That's right. Yeah.
And most of these works, including these here, they were just on a shelf for many years, potentially decades.
Well, not decades. I don't know how long he'd had that storage space.
He's been collecting a long time.
I know, but he'd only organized what I think of as his submarine. Not that long before
the
that.
sub-basement.
Yeah, like, have you been over at the New Star Space? Yeah, you were
yes,
there.
Yeah.
So you saw how packed those books and shelves are in a space that is literally 50% bigger and not L-shaped. So how he was, like, that was an engineering marvel, the fact that he got all those shelves and the books onto them. I couldn't quite believe it. And it was over, when I went to visit him, I thought, oh, wow, can we take this on? This is a bit much for us, right? But we're glad we did, especially because, we will have saved a lot of really fantastic stuff.
So I guess, how does that... So you have everything in the New Star Space.
Yes.
But obviously, New Star Publications will no longer be publishing new imprints.
Sadly, that is the case, yeah.
So I think we can treat this very conversationally. So we can just let the conversation emerge wherever it does. But I'm curious, obviously you published this letter, I think it was in January. Was it January of this year?
In January I made the announcement, yeah.
So in January you made the announcement that you would no longer be publishing new books. In October, when you were getting ready to accept the Felton collection, did you already have a sense that you would be closing down?
Through the fall, I was giving stuff very, very serious thought, through the summer and the fall. And it was a decision that I kind of reached, over Christmas and over the New Year, which is a traditional time of year for making those kinds of decisions.
It's true.
But yes, it was something that I had to start wrestling with, because we had a number of shocks early in 2024. We lost our U.S. distributor. We had I don't know the details, but there was some, our distributor in Canada, UTP Distribution, had some internal issues that it was dealing with, and it might have been brought on by a crisis at Indigo, which had two aspects. They had to clear their decks by returning a lot of books at the beginning of the year, and so we knew we were getting a massive amount of returns, but UTP was way behind in logging them, so we didn't know what and in what content and quantities. Our U.S. distributor, Small Press Distribution, failed in April, and what was the... You can edit this pause out. I have to regather my train of thought here. Oh, yes, and the other uncertainty was caused by the fact that we had been on notice with the BC Arts Council. They had a number of concerns about the press that revolved essentially around identity politics issues, but also our embrace of their organizational logic, and basically we were striking, in their view, too much of an independent stance in terms of what we were doing, and we were not aligned with what the BC Arts Council saw itself as supporting. So they gave us a very harsh assessment of our application 22-23, and we were basically instructed to address these deficits and pull up our socks in our application that we submitted in late 23. And I fully anticipated that we would have met their objections. We basically, tugged our forelocks and talked the talk and blah, blah, blah. And we were really, I was really surprised to receive the news that we had not addressed their issues adequately, that we continued to be on hold, on notice, and that we were therefore in real danger of losing our grant support. In other words, we were in a position where whether the press was able to continue depended on the outcome of our 24 grant, which we would not be finding out about until February 24, i.e. about 6 weeks before the end of our fiscal year. And I realized I could not put myself or anybody that I worked with into that kind of uncertainty. It was not fair, and it was not fair to the organization, having been, as stable as long as it had been, to be pushed into this position of instability and uncertainty. And I realized I had been, fighting the good fight, by which I mean with the arts councils, for quite a long time, and I did not have the youth energy, spring in my step anymore to do that. And I just realized, for personal reasons, partly, it was time to make the decision that I finally made at the end of the year and announced early in 2025.
January 25.
So yeah, that's how that unfolded. So in January 2025, I knew that I was going to be preparing for a next phase.
Okay. Interesting. I want to dig into the funding landscape a little bit more, if that's all right.
Because it's become more critical than it was a generation ago.
So the critical in what sense?
If I also on the New Star blog around that time wrote a couple of other pieces that poked into the state of Canadian publishing in material terms. Not in aesthetic terms, but in material terms. And I drew attention as much as I could to some extremely disturbing realities, the main one being that the Canadian publishers and writers' share of the Canadian book market had declined precipitously since the turn of the century and was now back at its mid-60s levels. And the difference being, of course, that we are now spending quite a few millions of bucks every year on this industry, but we were achieving literally nothing. We were no more than we were in 1966, when we were not spending a dime on any of this stuff.
Interesting.
And that, I think, is a real threat to us because, and I still feel this way, we are basically a change of government away from somebody deciding, you know what, why we don't need to do this stuff anymore.
Yeah.
And it would be more noticed by publishers and authors than it will be by readers, I'm afraid, in Canada, if that happens. What happened at the turn of the century, and I don't want to go too much into I think there's a room for study why this occurred, but the Canadian share and the Canadian published share of publishing in Canada, book sales in Canada had been rising slowly but steadily since the early 70s and probably peaked in the mid-90s at around 25%. We had declined precipitously after the late 90s. And this, leaving aside why that was, what that created was a situation that as follows. If we are publishers and this is the amount of money that we need, we were getting this much from the market as a small press, and then various granting agencies were topping up the rest. Well, all of a sudden, we were only getting this much from the market.
So your
so
deficit,
all of a sudden, there was a lot more, there was a much bigger role to play for the granting agencies, and they understood that. And they turned that to their advantage to politicize their work more. So it became subtle at first and quite unsubtle towards the end. Align yourself with what the government's priorities are, and we'll give you money.
Yeah.
And if you're not interested in that, we can't give you money. And in the bigger picture, and this is kind of the political conflict that we had with those organizations. Governments in Ottawa and in British Columbia have embraced a set of political economic logics that we use the term neoliberalism as a shorthand for. They've embraced that, and a part of that, a concomitant of those neoliberal political economic considerations, at a personal level, it has created a space for individualism and identity politics. And it is my belief, my feeling that our governments in Ottawa and British Columbia see identity politics as a kind of a replacement for social justice. If we can't have decent pay, decent living conditions, decent rent, at least you can feel great about yourself. And this is where identity politics come in, and they've embraced those in a big way. And there is a real naivete in the idea that they don't affect literature somehow. And they do affect literature somehow in the following way. The writing that New Star has tended to privilege and value more and give more space to, like Lisa's work, doesn't put the author at the center of the transaction. It's not I. It's I. This is what I saw, and this is how I feel about it. It's more, I would call it observation and witness, and there's way more space for the reader. In fact, there's way more obligation for the reader to figure out what they make of this. There are no paint by numbers kind of clues about how you should react emotionally, intellectually to this work, i.e. it's harder for the reader. It's more work. And these are all things that really, and I'm using Lisa's work, but it also goes through a lot of other work that we're doing, including George Stanley's work, which I've talked about, and a younger writer called Hamish Ballantyne.
Oh, yes, and I have.
There you go. There's his book. And he's a really young guy, but he is very much in that West Coast tradition that I'm talking about, i.e., his influences in that book are not Canadian writers. We're just not singing from the same hymn in the hymn book. And that is something that Arts Council bureaucrats really, they can't digest that. There's just no frame of reference for it. They don't have room for that. And that was not a recent thing. That's been a long-term thing. An amazing fact, I tell this to people, and they have trouble believing it, but at the end of New Star's relationship with the Canada Council and the BC Arts Council, with both bodies, our funding level was almost to the dollar what it was in 92, 93. It crept up every few years, and then it would be corrected back down.
So to the dollar in nominal terms?
No, actually, yeah. So if we were getting from the BC Arts Council $20,000 to $22,000, we were still getting that now.
But like $20,000 in $92,
no,
or in
$22,000.
So less money.
Way less money.
Accounting for inflation.
Way less money. Yeah, significantly less money. This was framed by them as ongoing, continued support.
Yeah.
But of course, everybody else's money was
going up.
You can
spend that in
up.
like a month.
Right?
Yeah.
So, to me, it came down to a politicization of their goals and a lack of any kind of aesthetic understanding or respect for the fact that literature can be more than about the writer.
Yeah, you're making me think, because I agree with you. It's something that's been ongoing for a while, but has accelerated in the 21st century.
Yeah.
And recently, so I'm a really big fan of the writer Nellie Arcon.
Okay, yeah, I know what you mean. I haven't read her,
Isabelle Fortier, I guess, is her birth name.
Okay,
and,
I know nothing about her,
But I was watching an interview with her from.
And she's a Quebec writer?
She's a Quebec writer, and she committed suicide in 2007, potentially.
Yeah.
And she was 37. She became very famous in her mid-20s.
Okay.
And she, just kind of going back to what you're saying about writers having to lead with their personal lives rather than their text. She's a very beautiful woman. She used to be an escort / sex worker.
That's a literary victim written all over her.
And she's a fantastic writer.
Yeah.
Deeply philosophical. And I was watching a couple interviews with her in French. Like there's one with CBC Radio-Canada. There's one on this French show called Tout le monde en parle. And essentially nobody wanted to talk about her text.
Right. They just want her backstory.
Yeah, they just wanted her backstory, and they were the interviewers were quite aggressive with her. The CBC interviewer even said, "Oh, well, I don't understand why you were so open on Tout le monde en parle about your personal life, but now you don't want to be open and you just want to talk about the text."
Yeah.
And I think
These
we don't need to dissect.
These people are idiots.
Yeah, it really angered me.
Yeah.
I actually didn't finish watching it because it made me so angry.
Yeah.
But I think you're pointing to something like
they cannot tell the difference between literature and real life.
Yeah.
And real life, there's a guy called Mark Fisher. I've
I know Mark
reading
Fisher.
about him, and I'm soon to plunge in because he's also talking about this. People mistake the presentation of stuff for the reality of stuff, and they become angry when you don't embrace and accept the representation as the real. And and he also committed suicide.
Yeah.
So. There's something about that kind of not computing that I think that it makes people feel not just marginal, but not there at all.
And I think when you talk about identity politics, like essentially, because it's like you said, it's not about social justice.
No.
It's about having the language to essentially advocate for the further neoliberalization of like our existing world.
And the atomization and basically what it posits is the idea that solidarity is actually impossible.
Yes. Yeah, it's very interesting, and I feel like because I think you're seeing it today with Mark. It's interesting you say with a change in government, because I think this current government is very much doing this. They don't want to fund anything, so they've recently cut a ton of positions at Libraries and Archives Canada just this recent week.
They're living in the past. They are...
Well, they're avoiding the past.
Yeah, well, in some way, yes, I see what you're saying in terms of the historical memory, but what they are still intensely believing is the 90s Clinton-Blair kind of idea. And, I mean, this has got less directly to do with my work in literature, but I am horrified by what I'm seeing. And Mark Carney is not just any banker, he's a central banker for two different neoliberal capitalist regimes. The idea that he can get in front of this neoliberal train and stop it is insane. All he can do is pour a little more coal onto it, and he's, I don't know what people are expecting. I just don't know what people think is going to happen in the next election, right?
But I think you're pointing to something interesting. So, before, when we were just kind of warming up, I suppose, and we were talking about, why is it that Vancouver is underappreciated? We were really talking about the geography of literature.
Underappreciated, I wouldn't use that word. It's just kind of invisible. It's over the mountains and you can't really see it, and it's not really
I guess under-examined.
Yeah, under-examined might be a better way. Under-examined might be a better way, yeah. And just thinking about the geography of things, so I'm interested, obviously, in the content and, of the works and the people and the evolution of their works, but the other thing that I find very interesting, and I think it speaks to this activist bent of granting agencies that you're talking about, is that you see this very similar thing happening in urban planning. So urban planning, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the history of the profession, especially in Vancouver. No.
But it is an American profession. So essentially, planning was developed by racists in the United States.
Right.
And they came to Vancouver in sometime in the early 20th century, maybe in the 10s or 20s. And, you know, they were like, hey, we need to start, you know, you should consider introducing zoning in Vancouver.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of an extension of Fordism and modern urban planning into basically the suburbs were a political, economic.
Yeah, literally
thing,
create zones where certain behavior is like appropriate and permitted, and zones were of exclusion. And so what I think is so interesting is that that's literally the root of planning. And similar to kind of what we've been talking about, I think the planning profession has accelerated in the last 20 years. There's a number. There's a ton of new planning jobs every day.
Is that right?
There's really not even enough people to do them.
Yeah.
And similar.
Well, Vancouver has reinvented itself as a kind of a heat sink for international loose capital, and that's a big part of it. The number one, there's a really interesting, difficult writer called David Harvey, and what he does, in his work, he's examining some holes in Marxist theory, and one of the ones that he spent his life examining, he's an urban geographer. He worked at Johns Hopkins, and he studied a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, urban development in the States, and that big trend. He made his reputation looking at the big trend of those inner city urban renewal projects that were kind of a big thing. And his insight is that one of the big challenges facing capital is you made your 12 or 20%. What do you do about that now? Because if you don't do something with it, the whole thing's going to collapse. And this is where people like Vancouver, cities like Vancouver come along. We got all this land. You can build up to blah, blah, blah. And so we are solving capitalism's problem, but also kicking it down the road by a generation, because what are you going to do with all that money that you just made in Vancouver? Yeah.
But the other thing that I find interesting is it's the same mechanism. So, you know, if you look at a lot of like, I don't know, it's like planning strategy documents, very similar like terminology and terms that you would see within like the granting agencies for like the arts. And yet somehow all of these issues persist. We obviously have a housing crisis. People have jobs.
Funny, isn't it? Yeah.
What I've been finding so interesting, just looking at all of these works, although I have to admit most of them were published in kind of like the rise of literature that you were talking about, but somehow people have made spaces, artists have created spaces to create art. So I guess I'm just curious, like, what was the story behind New Star, like, being created in the first place? Was there, like, how was it created? And then do you think that, you know, like, city or, like, urban planning or just the evolution of land supported or, like, hindered or led to the current state of where we are today with New Star?
There was a number of factors. One of them was a broad, post-war. So the post-war generation was coming of age in the 60s, and that unleashed a whole bunch of desires and hopes and dreams that were expressed in what we think of as the 60s counterculture stuff. Music, literature was a big part of that. They were all listening to the same records, and and so, yes, it was the zeitgeist was a big part of it. People were moving. There was moving out of post-war and into the next thing, the governments were responding to that, particularly like in my lifetime, the Pearson and Trudeau one administrations were fairly liberal by liberal standards, and they responded to the cultural, social, generational ferment by offering various kinds of programs to absorb some of this energy, local initiatives, the LIP program, and opportunities for youth. You've probably heard
So
of these
local
things.
immigration partnership? Is
No,
that what you-
that might have been part of it, but I mostly know about opportunities for youth, which are granting agent. So if you're a young person, you had a great idea for a commune to do laundry for this blah blah blah, you could get money for it.
Okay.
And a lot of the projects were literary, and in
Okay,
fact
yes.
OFYLIP largely funded the first generation of literary publishing in BC.
Okay.
Everything from Pulp Press to Press Gang, which was a feminist press, to New Star, to Tellin Books, which started out as Tellin, a literary magazine. And, Tisch was part of that. It kind of evolved into Tisch. The people from Tisch most of them went into Tellin. Some of them were involved in New Star in the early days.
Okay.
But that came out of a broad social political ferment that the government of the day, and we had more money in those days for this sort of thing, it seemed, provided some money for some incentive to kind of develop, and it resulted in a generation of Canadian literature, and as Canadian art, Canadian music. It was a time of cultural fluorescence in a lot of different media, and that was largely funded by, as I say, programs that initially were not there to fund the arts.
Yeah.
They were kind of not repurposed, but that was one of the purposes they found. And the arts councils were late to the party. The first arts council that funded literature was Ontario, and they were and that was mid-70s, 73, 74. It took a couple of years for the Canada Council to follow suit, and the BC Arts Council had only very minor arts, and basically it was for Stagecoach and Steamboat kind of publishing and not literary publishing, literally until the 90s. And I was I wouldn't say instrumental, but I was quite active at the time in the BC Publishers Association, and our priority for quite a few years was to have BC also offer literary arts programs, the way at that point I think 7 or 8 of the other provinces had them, and to house them in an arts council. And so we got the first thing in about 1990 and the arts council in about 1995. And for me, it was actually all a bit of an irony that right from the get-go, those organizations, especially the arts council, didn't like New Star because of our political activism. We were publishing books that said capitalism is bad, colonialism is bad, these multiculturalism programs are kind of, suspicious, suspect. We were we even had published books that criticized the elected government of the day. They were not comfortable with any of this stuff.
Interesting.
Yeah, they were very explicit. People told us directly, arts councils, people on the jury said, we love what you're doing, but we're an arts council. The guy who was the head of writing and publishing at the Canada Council around this time, who was a great guy, got along well with him. He said, we love your stuff, but we're an arts council. We're about poetry and plays and ballet and the creative arts and blah blah blah.
Arts are not political is essentially what they were
These
telling
nonfiction books that were a big part of our list are not what they really had in mind, including the Transmontanist books that we did. Yes, and that was like a generation ago, right?
I mean, it's still like that. I just find it so
I know it's
baffling. Who are they to decide?
Yeah. Well, they were never meant to decide.
Yeah, it's just
but then
funny.
all of a sudden they ended up with all this power.
Yeah.
And who doesn't like power,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you see it in other parts of the arts as well. Like, for example, I'm working with a actor-comedian, and she can't, we received a grant, which is great for her to develop her play, but she can't say it's stand-up comedy. It's a play. So the councils will not fund comedy, and she's very much part of quite a honestly very impressive like comedy scene in Vancouver. They
Okay,
do
yeah.
so much. There's things every night, multiple things every night. People go out every night. Most of those people cannot get funding
Right.
from the government, even though, especially in terms of like the capitalist sense, people go to those shows.
Mhm.
They pay ticket fees.
Mhm.
They pay for alcohol. They bring in a lot of money.
Mhm.
But because they are comedians and not actors,
Yeah, it's not serious.
whatever
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
however you define that,
Yeah.
they don't get funding. So I think it's quite interesting to see this play out among the various artistic.
Well, one of the things that the Arts Council is there to fund something an activity that is forward-looking and that is mostly concerned about making things that haven't been made yet. But the Arts Councils are mostly shaped by stuff that's already happened, and they can't see that. And it's the artist's job to see what hasn't been done, not the administrator's job. In fact, that's the difference. The artist can see that stuff. The administrator, which includes, people like you and I'm a publisher, I can't, I look at stuff like when this book came in, I was aware of her work, but I had no frame of reference for it. It was like I had seen nothing like this before, and certainly nothing like this by a local writer before. It was, at a time, a real revolutionary work. I see my job as facilitating that sort of thing. And I see the Arts Council's job not as facilitating that sort of thing, but facilitating the work, enabling the work of people like me, whose job it is to pick up that sort of thing, to notice what's going on. But they, and one of the ways I characterized it is they have, and this is one of the, New Star got caught up in the teeth of this machine, is they went from seeing themselves as administering a program that supported publishing in Canada, writing and publishing in Canada, and don't forget they were initially, I won't get into that. They went from supporting writing and publishing in Canada to managing writing and publishing in Canada. They're not managing the programs anymore, they're managing the whole industry. And that, I think, is the moment when reader interest declined. Readers, especially, readers of, difficult text, they're critical of what they're reading.
Yeah.
And they can smell bullshit a mile away.
Yeah. I won't get into that either.
Yeah, okay.
Maybe off camera.
Maybe, another time, yeah.
So, well, I guess, because you're leading me to think about what is the purpose of these programs? Like, you mentioned Canadian nationalism. Do you think it's just the remainder of an attempt to create a national identity, or is it...
That certainly was part of it.
But do you think it's a remainder, or do you think it's like a current activist desire to create this notion of Canadian heritage?
I don't think there's anything like that at the moment.
Okay.
In fact, the whole neoliberal project is to erase those kinds of distinctions. No, I think what's right now, it's more about entropy. I think you're right. The initial impetus for the arts councils, they generally are in other jurisdictions, is to foster a sense of national identity and belonging. That, I guess maybe that's just so taken for granted now that they feel they've had to reimagine or reinvent themselves for some other purpose. I don't know if they still have that purpose.
So you're leading me to think of, okay, so what's very interesting, so this, I have two other pieces. So
Yeah,
as
you have
you
a lot
know,
of show and tell stuff there.
here, open it this way so you can see it. So,
Norm Seibum, yes.
as you know,
Yeah.
because you're in the Feral Archive,
Yeah.
pretty much everything that James did not donate to you
Yeah.
was destroyed in this water main break in February 25.
Yeah, this seems to have survived.
3 things survived,
Okay.
and this is one of them.
Uh-huh.
The other thing, which I did not bring because they're framed in my house, one of them is actually a debate poster from the 80s, where the question is, have Canadian government subsidies helped or hindered Canadian literature?
Yeah, and that was a big debate. And these guys were the people behind Bringhurst. He was involved in that, an American writer who moved to Canada. And a guy called John Metcalf, who is still alive, was very much...
Wait, so did you go to this debate?
No, not really. Partly because they were not terribly relevant to the the work, the literature I was interested in.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So, but what
but
do you
I
think?
will.
I guess how would you answer the question?
I don't. I'm not going to answer the question directly, but I will note the following, which is not only has Canadian literature as an aesthetic brand, if you want to call it that, been pretty moribund since the 90s, for whatever reason that is. If you ask anybody, I'll ask you, what do you think in our time space, in our current age, are and have been the great Canadian writers?
I mean, I just mentioned one to you, Nellie Arcon.
Yeah, okay, okay.
She's underappreciated,
Yeah.
but definitely one of the great
Yeah.
Canadian writers.
Yeah. No, very few people outside of the country or even in the country have ever heard of her.
I think she's known in France.
Yeah, quite possibly. Yeah.
She's definitely, she made quite a splash, and I think, since my publisher knowledge is very limited, because I think she was translated into English by Talon.
No, published. I don't know who translated Anvil Kaufman.
Anvil, that's
Brian
right,
Kaufman
yeah.
did her. Yeah.
So I'm not sure. Maybe she's known because of this recent translation.
Yeah, I don't think she's generally well known. I don't think that book sold particularly well. I think she did two,
No,
right?
she has like 4 or 5.
But a couple were translated and done by Kaufman, by Anvil, I think. That many?
I thought they did 4.
Oh, okay. So, but yeah, I don't. She has not established a big. She's no Margaret Atwood or Alice Munro
no.
or any of those people. And here's what I would, so if you asked any person in New York, for example, who are the great Canadian writers,
Yeah, let's say Margaret Atwood.
they would, the people, and they will mention people, they had already got their start in the mid-'60s.
Right, yeah.
They were already around when all that stuff happened.
because you see their names in
maybe
these
the only
papers.
person that came along that you might, Michael Ondaatje, but he was already publishing then.
He's literally in
Yeah.
this one.
And so he was
He's
already
here. This is him.
around. Yeah, there he is. Yeah.
And this is from the 60s.
Yeah. So a lot of what we think of as the giants of CanLit, they were already working, right? They did not need any arts council to exist. Maybe they needed them to be sustained, but this was not getting arts council money. This was a few people putting, a little bit of, and of course this is another thing that's changed. Nobody has loose change anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
The fundraising,
and that makes
you mean?
a huge amount of difference. Yeah. Well, just a bunch of people deciding they're at the Cecil and they decide, hey, let's do a magazine.
Oh, you mean literally
Nobody-
having disposable income so that you can do fun projects with your friends?
Yeah, exactly.
Inconceivable.
Yeah, I know. You know what people used to do? This will shock some of the young listeners out there. People used to work for 6 months or 8 months and then go on UI
Yeah.
and write their book. And then they'd go back to work. Criminals. They should be in jail, every one of them, right?
Yeah.
There's a
and
mouse on your camera.
it's for muffling. It's feral.
Yeah, it's feral.
Let's see. I wonder if. Oh, well, there you go. I've been starting to look at who's funded these. So you have to acknowledge them. This is it's Leon and Thea Kerner
Yeah,
Foundation.
okay, fine.
But this is UBC, so it kind of makes sense.
So university, private foundation.
This is Blue Ointment, so all self. I believe it was all self.
Beautiful, yeah.
What do you know? You can also, please, just feel free to.
They're nice.
I brought them out for you. I wanted you to look at them. And I specifically took out Vancouver or British Columbia.
And Bissett
publications.
spent a fair amount of time here.
Yes.
Yeah.
A lot.
Judith Copperthorne, she just died a few months ago. George Heyman, he was a cabinet minister in the last NDP.
That's him?
That's him.
The same person. I would have assumed that was just some other guy with the same name.
Same guy. Yeah.
I met him.
John Newlove,
That's so funny.
I think he was briefly out here. Jerry Gilbert, David W.
Okay, this is
Scott
what I wanted to
Lawrence,
show you.
Yeah, Margaret Atwood's in here. George Bowering's in here. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, George Heyman. That's he'd do
Oh,
that.
he spelled it
He'd
differently.
the hippie thing. Yeah, we
Yeah.
would do that in those days.
So here's what I thought was
Ken
interesting.
West, I know that name too.
So.
And Cybum, he's I don't know if he's any good. Some people think he's, the Shizzlenik. He's a weird guy. I think he might still be alive. I'm not
I have
sure.
a bunch of his stuff over there, but it's very
And
moldy.
yeah, there are people who have been collecting his stuff because they believe he's great. Michael Morris, my God. Yeah, you should do some Googling of some of these names. But Michael Morris is I think he died a few years ago. But he was part of the art scene around the Western Front.
Oh, cool.
And as a conceptual stunt in 1972, Michael Morris and a guy called Vincent Trassoff, who dressed up in a Mr. Peanut costume, ran as Mr. Peanut for the mayoralty of Vancouver. I think Judith Copperthorne might have been one of his... No, it was somebody else I'm thinking of. He had some Vancouver poets were his kind of backup dancers, kind of.
Okay.
Thing. It was great theater. Going to band tomorrow. Jerry Gilbert. Calvin Garnett. Yeah, wow. Scott Lawrence, he did a book with the early New Star.
Which book?
It was a book called, I think, Should Stick to Carrying Water.
Okay.
An early poetry book. New Star went through a couple of... it started out as a poetry press. It was taken over by Maoists in around 74 and became a hardcore, hard left press which scorned literature as a bourgeois affectation. And then in the early 80s, it went back to start doing literature. And and when I took over in the 90s, I got right back into it.
So can you tell me, why did you get involved?
It was actually, I got a phone call from Lanny Beckman, who was looking for somebody to replace. So an old girlfriend of mine had a summer job at New Star Books. And New Star was growing at the time, and he wanted my friend Kathy to stick around, but she was going to law school or something. I can't remember. I think she was going to law school. And she said, but why not talk to my friend Rolf, who's working at the province but hates his job. I was a reporter and a copy editor. A reporter.
Oh, reporter.
And a copy editor at the Vancouver province.
Okay.
But I think I was, in the meantime, I was at the BC Teachers Federation. That's right.
Okay.
I was there for a couple of years. And she said he's getting tired of his job at the BC Teachers Federation. Wasn't quite true, but what I was going through was I'd gotten involved in a campaign to organize the support staff there. And that was way more interesting than my day job there, which was to work on the membership newsletter. And it was right at the end of that period where, what am I going to do now? Then that I got the offer to come to New Star.
Okay.
So I had not pointed myself in that direction, and I had to grow into the job. But yeah, it was one of the few actual funny things that Quill and Choir ever did is about 30 years ago. They ran a Bill Bissett poem through a spell checker, which were at the time new things. It was pretty funny.
What made you say yes to an interview or to the job, or?
Sometimes, I don't know if it's happened to you, but sometimes there's a knock on the door and the right answer is yes, right? So it's not something I had to give a lot of thought to. It was instinctual.
Mm-hmm.
It's either rock and roll or Roman Catholicism. One of them has to go. Have you noticed something that I've been picking up on this summer? The proliferation of people wearing crosses. Have you noticed
Yes, that's
that?
a new trend.
Yeah. Has this been commented on? Why? Do you know?
I think it has been commented on. It's like
I don't-
the trad cath aesthetic.
Oh, is that what it is? Oh.
Yeah, it's taken off on social media.
Oh, okay.
But I think it is a reaction to some of
Reaction.
what you're talking about,
Reaction
which
is
is
the right
this
word.
neoliberalism,
Yeah.
identity
Oh, yeah.
politics.
But I think it's a far right reaction.
100%,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
because everything is
The Catholic Church
dialectical.
is a bad. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not people. I mean, I guess your point around books being complex.
Oh, Maxine, yeah.
It's
These are
not
here.
really something people are really digging into.
Yeah. No, they're not exactly being encouraged to.
Even though-
these are amazing things. These
Yeah,
are
they're
amazing.
beautiful.
And these all survived.
Oh yes, so these these are not part of the archive.
Oh, I see. You picked them up
They're-
separately?
Basically, in exchange for cataloging for
Oh,
free.
they were extras.
If there was an extra, I could keep it.
Oh, okay.
That was my payment in lieu.
Well, there's some beauties
And
here.
they're so cool.
Yeah.
I think Bill Bissett is
Yeah.
probably my favorite as a publisher.
You know that in the People's Co-op, and this is not from him, it was about 5 or more years ago, we got a donation of books, a box of donations, and quite often we get the odd, the other odd and end in it, and this book had a little canvas in it, a painting. This box had a little canvas, and it's kind of neat, and we put it up, and it was up for a long time before I squinted at it and realized, you know what? That's a Bill Bissett. That's his signature right there. So somebody gave us a Bill Bissett.
Yeah,
painting.
did you think they knew?
They knew.
They knew.
But we
Just
didn't.
you didn't.
Yeah, we didn't for a long time. But at least we realized, this is great, and we put it up right away. So if you go into the bookstore, it's a yellow painting just to the left of the cash register.
Okay, I'll look at
Yeah.
it. And I guess, okay, so that leads me to a question I've asked you many times, but I feel like the more I talk to people about you, the more I realize people don't really understand what the connection is between New Star and People's Co-op.
It's purely me.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no corporate connection. Yeah. I devoted my life to New Star, and now I'm devoting my golden years to the co-op.
Can you tell it? Please expand.
Sure. What do you want to know?
Well, okay, so actually I'm more curious not just about the co-op, but just about the process of closing down the publications.
Colin Brown. Wow.
Is there a process, or is it just we had the fall 2024 imprints and we're done?
We had to make it up as we were going on. There is no how to wind down your business for dummies that I know of. And a publishing company in any case is not just any business. So a lot of it has been, trying to figure out what to do now, what's the right way to go about this. And there's been more work involved than I thought.
Like what?
It's hard to, there's been a lot more administrative overhead than I expected there would be. Everything from dealing with the UTP distribution to winding down our Amazon stuff.
Okay.
And right now, shipping to the U.S. is in chaos. I don't know if you've heard any of this. Yeah, it's
Little
yeah,
economic war.
yeah, pretty much. We can't ship little people like us. We can't really ship books into the States right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just insane.
Yeah, it's bad timing.
Yeah, but I am. And it's not fun administration because you're not planning your next year's list and stuff like that. But it's. I guess I've been insulating myself a little bit emotionally, but in the larger sense, I am at peace with the decision. I don't think it's a good sign of the times, but I also realize it's not just me personally that this sort of thing is happening to. And there has been a lot of understanding and sympathy that I've encountered, and which is gratifying because you don't hear that all the time. But yeah, it's been a sad and at times difficult process. But it's also been fairly I don't know if I may be still too much into it to really reflect on the winding down. I have more distance on the decisions about why I had to wind down. I am, I know that I'm not alone in experiencing these issues. My colleagues, many of them are in a more, comfortable position with the granting agencies, but they're also experiencing the same long-term decline of the industry that I am. One of the strange discontinuities that I had over the last 20 years is, I'd be up at 18 or 15 years, I guess. I'd be up at, a New Star, and, it wasn't a steady decline. It was, it was bumpy, but over the long term, it was difficult to avoid that our industry, our sector was in decline. And then I go down to the co-op, where I was part of a group of people in the early 10s who were pulling it out of the ditch. It would almost closed a number of times, and it wanted to close, it planned to close in about 2010, 2012. And, but the store, has had steady growth since then. It's more than three times as busy as it was now than it was then. It's got twice the sales now than it did on the eve of COVID. And when the store almost closed in 2012, there was one other bookstore on the drive. There are now 5 bookstores on the drive, and that guy Nathan who has the table in the park on all the weekends. So it's become a real book row.
It's true.
And I realized there is a real disconnect, not just between 18th and the gloom we feel at 18th and the co-op and the positivity we feel down there, but our whole industry has become disconnected from that. Our whole industry is no longer in touch with all these people, including just as many younger people as ever, who are interested in books and literature and want to consume it that way. And this is not just Canada, but one of the things that we decided, if that's the right word, in the 80s is up until the late 20th century, for the entire history of the printed book, there was two social institutions that were central to that. The bookstore, the bookseller, who was the original publisher, as you might know if you've done any publishing history. Well, I'm not talking about William Hoffer.
You mean like way back?
Way back.
Way back.
Way back. And Hoffer was in that tradition. He was trying to keep that alive. And the other institution was the press about the press, i.e., people were not just arguing in books; they were arguing in journals about those books. Completely gone, or completely been replaced by something that is far more diffuse, the internet. And I mentioned I'm reading about Mark Fisher now. He's one of the people who did most of his work, in fact, on the internet, and it only came out in books afterwards. But arguably, I think it only started to have really broader influence after it came out in books. But that whole forum for just talking about stuff has become a lot more decentralized and a lot more diffuse, and I'll be the first to admit it, I don't understand how it works anymore. And that was, part of, maybe I don't have the right brain to do this. Somebody who's doing publishing now has to come at it from a different kind of a media background. But I do know it does work, because I see in the store people are still talking about and hearing about books and asking for books that weren't necessarily covered in the Globe and Mail and the New York Times and stuff like that. And so in the absence of those kinds of publications, the bookstore continues to be, in fact, might be more important than it has been in the past, because it's the main place where people find out about books. The internet, there is a lot of stuff about books on the internet, but the large media things on the internet aren't interested in books, and so there's very little in the internet mainstream about books. The books are, as far as I can tell, more marginalized in the world of social media and stuff like that. And one of the ways I look at Substack is another thing I don't understand at all, but I do see it as a reaction to the 280 character limit. Right? People feel that there has to be a place for longer think pieces that might evolve into books, which are even longer think pieces. But yeah, I think this is what we did in Canada, and I was at those meetings where people very consciously made the decision. They embraced the idea that bricks and mortar bookstores, and that was the term that was used, a slightly patronizing term, were a remnant of the past, like typewriters, and we were beyond that, and everything was on the internet now, and that's turned out to be a dream that hasn't really materialized.
Well, I think it just goes back to that question of land and like zoning and how people make spaces for themselves
Books don't make enough money to be able to rent spaces in Manhattan or downtown Vancouver. The West End of Vancouver desperately needs 3 or 4 bookstores, but no bookstore can afford the West End.
And yet somehow there's so many on Commercial Drive, and it's not like the rent is
The rent
much
is
cheaper.
it's a bit cheaper than downtown.
Is it?
Oh yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it's cheaper there than it is in Kitts too.
But I think also just that people need places to be around each other, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what the internet, it facilitates conversation for sure, but the internet is essentially placeless drifting.
Yeah.
And
Placeless
people,
it is no place.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think
But not utopia.
there's there's a really interesting book I'm reading right now called How Modernity Forgets by Paul Connerton.
Okay. That sounds...
And he specifically basically says that like we forget because we have no place, and memory is linked to place. So if you look at, you know, whether it's the idea of the memory palace or like the way Cicero speaks about, okay, how do you become better at remembering? It's literally identify markers in the place that you inhabit, and in those markers you can imbue those with memory so that when you see them you will be able to recall things. And then I think to your point around, you know, not just the internet, but I think hyper-financialization where people are really just moving, you know, where the jobs are, either because they're, you know, very poor and don't have a lot of agency, so they have to move, or actually they have a lot of agency, so they're able to split their time, you know, between like different global cities, so to speak. But because of that, there is an absence of place.
Yeah.
And because also people are drifting so much, there's an absence of convening. And so I think that's where the bookshops...
And there are other people who write about that from a more mental health aspect, perspective too. So it sounds like he's, like in the 80s, there was a lot of writing about spaces and places in terms of the idea that we think, for example, of the sacred mound as having some meaning before humans got there, but the realization is, no, we make spaces. There, even geographic features become places by virtue of human interaction. It's nothing until we decide, oh, it's the sacred mound of the fire god or whatever it is.
Yeah, it's interaction.
That's right. We inscribe a meaning onto that space.
And we do that together.
And we do
right?
that.
Like you
That's
said,
right.
we inscribe.
Do that together. It's exactly right. And that is completely absent on the internet.